I grew up in a small town nestled between dense woods and endless stretches of farmland. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and most families had been there for generations. But there was something off about our town, something people didn't talk about. It was the sort of unspoken rule that wove itself into the fabric of our community, a rule so embedded that no one ever questioned it out loud. People didn't leave. Sure, some moved a few miles down the road or settled in the nearest city, but that was rare. What I mean is no one ever really left permanently. People stayed, got older, started families of their own, and eventually were buried in the small cemetery on the hill. It was like a loop that kept repeating itself, a cycle I didn't quite understand until I got older. I first noticed something was strange when I was about 8. My best friend, David, lived just down the street. We'd play together every day after school, digging holes in the backyard, pretending to be pirates or explorers discovering new lands. But one day, David didn't show up for our usual game. I went over to his house, and his mother answered the door, looking tense. "David can't come out today," she said curtly, glancing over her shoulder as if she expected someone to be listening. "Is he sick?" I asked, peeking around her leg, trying to catch a glimpse of him. Her face tightened. "No, he's just staying inside. Go home, dear." I lingered on her porch, confused. Usually, she was friendly, always offering me a slice of cake or a glass of lemonade. But that day, she didn't say another word, just closed the door softly in my face. David didn't come back to school. Days turned into weeks, and no one talked about him anymore. When I asked my parents, they exchanged a quick look before my dad cleared his throat and said, "David's family moved, son. That happens sometimes." I stared at him. "Where did they go?" "Just somewhere else. Don't worry about it." And that was that. I was 8. I didn't understand the look in their eyes or why my mother seemed nervous all of a sudden. But I remember standing there, the silence thick between us, realizing something important. I wasn't supposed to ask about David. Over the years, it happened again and again. Someone would disappear, a classmate, a neighbor, even a teacher once. People would just go. And every time, no one would say a word. The empty desk at school would stay empty for a few days, and then a new kid would show up, filling the gap like the old one never existed. When I was 12, I finally asked my dad about it again. We were sitting on the back porch, sipping sweet tea, the air heavy with the scent of freshly cut grass. "Why do people leave?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. He stiffened, his knuckles turning white around the glass. For a long moment, he didn't say anything, just stared out at the yard, his jaw clenched. Then he turned to me, his expression hard. "People don't leave, son. They just move on." "What does that mean?" I pressed. "Drop it," he snapped, his voice sharp. I flinched, shocked by the sudden anger in his tone. My dad was a calm man, patient to a fault. But in that moment he looked almost afraid. "I'm serious," he said, softer now, almost pleading. "You don't want to know." That was the end of the conversation. After that, I kept my mouth shut, but I started paying more attention. I noticed the hushed conversations, the way people averted their eyes when someone's name came up after they were gone. I realized there was a pattern to it, a rhythm that our town seemed to follow. When someone disappeared, it was as if they were erased. Pictures vanished from photo albums. Letters were burned. Even their names were spoken less and less until it was like they'd never been there at all. But what scared me most was that nobody ever talked about leaving themselves. Not once did I hear anyone say they were moving away, or even hint at wanting to go somewhere else. It was like we were all trapped in an invisible cage, one that only I seemed to notice. As I got older, I tried to push it out of my mind, to convince myself that I was imagining things. But then, last summer, something happened that made me realize just how wrong I was. I was 17, about to start my senior year of high school. My best friend, Sarah, was planning her future. She wanted to go to college, to leave town and study somewhere far away. I remember sitting in her room, listening to her talk excitedly about applications and scholarships, her eyes bright with dreams of freedom. But then one day she stopped talking about it. We were sitting on her porch, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the yard. I glanced at her, surprised. "Hey, did you hear back from that school you applied to?" I asked. Sarah's smile faltered. I decided not to go." "What? Why?" She shrugged, looking down at her hands. "I just changed my mind." "That's not like you," I said slowly. "You've been talking about leaving for years." "Yeah, well, people change." She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Besides, it's not like it's such a big deal, right? I can stay here. There's nothing wrong with staying." The way she said it sent a shiver down my spine. I wanted to ask more, to push her, but there was something in her expression, something haunted, that made me stop. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the people who had just disappeared, about how, for the first time, I'd seen someone on the verge of leaving and then not. The next day, Sarah was gone. Her parents told everyone she'd gone to live with her aunt in the next town over, that she'd decided to take some time off before college. But I knew it was a lie. I knew it deep down in my gut, because Sarah wouldn't have just left without saying goodbye to me. She would have told me if she was leaving, and just like David, she never came back. But what scared me most wasn't that she was gone. It was that, after a few weeks, I found myself forgetting about her. The details of her face blurred in my mind. The sound of her laugh faded. I had to force myself to remember her, to hold on to her image like it was slipping through my fingers. It was like the town itself was erasing her from my memory. That was when I made a decision. I had to find out what was going on. I had to know why people left and why no one seemed to care. Because if I didn't, I was afraid that one day, I'd be the one who disappeared. And no one would even notice I was gone. The first step was gathering information, something that, in a town like ours, was easier said than done. There were no records of people who left, no family members mourning publicly, no hints of any lingering presence. Even old yearbooks were mysteriously blank when it came to the missing names. It was as if the town itself had a hand in removing every trace of those who vanished. But I had one advantage. I knew what to look for. All those years of seeing people disappear had made me hyper-aware of the smallest details. So I started keeping a journal, jotting down every name, every sudden absence, every family that seemed a little too quiet. I sketched maps, marked homes where someone had moved, and noted dates when teachers or neighbors would inexplicably vanish. The pattern was clearer than ever before. That's how I discovered the disappearances. It happened about every 3 months. Sometimes it was a single person, a child, a teacher, or a shopkeeper who no one knew well. Sometimes it was a whole family. I went back 10 years, then 15, tracing through old newspapers and community newsletters my parents had saved. The people always left in clusters, like waves breaking on the shore. And after each wave, there was an eerie calm. People would be on edge for a while, whispering to each other more quietly, keeping their children close. Then, slowly, life would return to normal until the next disappearance. There was a rhythm to it, and I realized, with a cold knot of fear in my stomach, that we were due for another wave soon. I needed to find out more, to get closer to someone who was at the heart of it all. And there was one person in town who seemed to know more than anyone else. Mr. Halverson, the librarian. He was an old man, thin and wiry, with a head of sparse white hair and a face like a weathered book cover, crinkled and lined but full of stories. He'd been around for as long as anyone could remember, longer even. Some whispered that he'd been the librarian for almost 70 years. It was a joke, of course, but as I looked through old photos of the library, I found one taken in 1975. And sure enough, standing in the background, there was Mr. Halverson, looking only slightly younger than he did now. I started visiting the library more frequently, always during the last hour before closing, when the building was nearly empty and the shadows stretched long between the shelves. Mr. Halverson would be at his desk, meticulously organizing returned books or reading quietly. I'd sit a few tables away, pretending to work on a project, watching him out of the corner of my eye. Took 3 weeks before he finally spoke to me. "You're quite the studious one, aren't you?" he asked one evening, his voice low and gravelly. I looked up, startled. He was standing right beside me, his watery blue eyes fixed on my notebook. I closed it instinctively, but he didn't seem angry, more curious, if anything. "Just working on some research," I said lamely. His gaze lingered on me for a moment longer. Then he nodded slowly. "So I see. And what exactly are you researching?" I hesitated, my pulse racing. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. I could lie, make up something about a school project. But something told me that Mr. Halverson already knew, that he'd been waiting for me to say it. "People who leave," I said quietly. "People who disappear." For a long moment he said nothing. The air between us seemed to thicken, the silence heavy with unspoken words. Then he smiled, a thin, humorless stretch of his lips. "I see," he murmured. "Why don't you come with me, then? I think I have something that might help you." I followed him through the library, past rows of neatly organized books and dusty shelves, to a small, nondescript door at the very back. I'd never noticed it before. It blended into the wall, hidden behind a row of encyclopedias that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. Mr. Halverson produced a small, brass key from his pocket and unlocked the door, gesturing for me to go inside. The room beyond was small, more of a closet than an actual room. There was a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting a dim, flickering glow over the cramped space. Stacks of old books and yellowing papers lined the shelves, and in the center of the room stood a large filing cabinet, its metal surface scratched and dented. "This," Mr. Halverson said softly, "is the town's unofficial history." He opened the top drawer of the filing cabinet, rifling through the folders until he found what he was looking for. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger and handed it to me. I took it carefully, my fingers trembling. "What is this?" I whispered. "Names," he replied. "Dates. Records of people who have left." I flipped open the ledger, scanning the pages. Each entry was written in neat, meticulous handwriting, listing a name, a date, and a brief description. Asterisk Jane Wilkins, age 9, disappeared March 3, 1987. Last seen at school. Family claims she moved to live with relatives in Florida. Asterisk. There were hundreds of entries, hundreds of names, stretching back decades. My breath caught in my throat as I turned the pages, recognizing some of the names. David's was there and Sarah's too. But what really made my blood run cold was the final entry, the one written just a few weeks ago. Asterisk Sarah Watson, age 17. Disappeared July 5, 2024. Last seen at home. Parents report she moved to her aunt's house in a neighboring town. Asterisk. I looked up at Mr. Halverson, my heart pounding in my chest. Why are you showing me this? I asked hoarsely. Why do you have this? Because, he said quietly, you're asking questions. And in this town, asking questions is dangerous. He leaned in closer, his eyes sharp and intense. People disappear for a reason, you know. And the more you dig, the more you're going to find yourself on that list. I don't understand, I stammered. Why do people disappear? Where do they go? His gaze softened slightly, almost pitying. Some things are better left alone, son. Sometimes people leave because they want to. Sometimes they're made to want to. And sometimes, he trailed off, his expression distant, haunted. Sometimes they don't have a choice. But you need to stop, boy, he said sharply, cutting me off. Put the book back and go home. Forget about this. Forget about the people who are gone. Or else what? I whispered. He stared at me, his eyes filled with a deep, weary sadness. Then he reached out and gently took the ledger from my hands, sliding it back into the drawer and closing it with a soft click. Or else you'll be next. The words hung in the air, chilling me to the bone. And in that moment, I knew he was right. Because as I turned to leave, I glanced back at the drawer, and I saw that there was another entry. An entry with my name on it. Asterisk Jason Miller, age 17. Disappeared October 6, 2024. Last seen at the library. Asterisk. My heart stopped as I stared at the entry, the ink still glistening slightly under the dim light. My name was there, clear as day. The date matched today's. The exact moment when I'd been standing in this room, the moment I realized I'd crossed an invisible line. Mr. Halverson shut the drawer firmly, his eyes boring into mine. Now you understand, he murmured. There are rules here, rules that you don't break. I'm not. I tried to speak, but my voice was choked with fear. I'm still here. I haven't gone anywhere. Not yet, he replied softly. But you're on the list now. Once you're on the list, there's no turning back. I stumbled back, my legs suddenly weak. But I don't want to disappear, I said desperately. I'll stop asking questions. I won't look into it anymore. I swear. It's too late for that. His voice was flat, emotionless, as if he were reciting a fact rather than giving me a death sentence. The only thing you can do now is run. Run? I echoed, my mind spinning. Run where? What does that even mean? Mr. Halverson glanced toward the door, his expression tense. Listen to me very carefully, he whispered, his voice barely audible. You have until midnight. After that, they'll come for you. They always come for the ones on the list. You can try to leave town, but no one's ever made it past the border. Still, if you run far enough, if you hide well enough, maybe, just maybe, you'll last longer than the others. He stepped back, his face tightening with some unreadable emotion. But you have to go. Now. I stood there, frozen, my mind reeling. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This was real. All of it. The disappearances, the erased memories, the lies, everything. And I was next. I swallowed hard, forcing my legs to move. I'll go. But just as I turned to leave, he grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong for such an old man. One more thing, he hissed. They're not what you think. When they come, they won't look like monsters. They won't even look dangerous. But they are. Don't trust anyone. Anyone. Not your friends, not your family. Once they know you're on the list, they'll do whatever it takes to bring you back. Understand? I nodded shakily, barely comprehending his words. He released me, and I bolted for the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The library felt darker, the air thick with a suffocating tension as I stumbled out into the main area. I half expected to see people waiting for me, strange figures lurking in the shadows, ready to drag me away. But the library was empty. I burst out into the street, gulping in the cool evening air. The town looked exactly the same, quiet, peaceful, like any other night. Streetlights cast a soft glow over the sidewalks, and a few cars rumbled by, their headlights flashing in the distance. A couple walked hand in hand, laughing softly as they passed me. Everything was so normal, but it wasn't, because now I knew the truth. I started running, my shoes pounding against the pavement. I didn't know where I was going, didn't have a plan, but I knew I couldn't go home. My parents, could they be trusted? Would they even believe me if I told them what was happening? Mr. Halverson's warning echoed in my ears. Don't trust anyone. I made it to the end of Main Street before I had to stop, my lungs burning. I doubled over, gasping for breath, my mind racing. Midnight, that's what he'd said. I had until midnight to figure something out. But what the hell was I supposed to do? Jason! I jerked upright, my heart nearly stopping as a familiar voice called my name. I turned, and there, standing under a streetlight, was Katie. Katie Jensen, my childhood friend. We hadn't spoken much since middle school, drifting apart as we grew up. But there she was, her face creased with concern as she stepped toward me. What's going on? She asked softly. Why are you running around like this? I stared at her, my pulse pounding in my ears. Could I trust her? Could I even explain what was happening? But before I could respond, she reached out, her hand brushing my arm. Hey, she said gently. It's okay. Just talk to me. You look like you've seen a ghost. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to break down right then and there. Katie, I can't, I stammered. I can't stay. I need to leave. Now. Her brow furrowed. Leave? Jason, what are you talking about? I'm on the list, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I'm going to disappear. I don't know how or why, but it's going to happen. And if I don't get out of town... Whoa, slow down, she said, holding up her hands. Jason, you're not making any sense. What list? What are you talking about? I glanced around, my eyes darting nervously to the shadows. It was too dangerous to explain here. Someone could be watching, or listening. Just trust me, I pleaded. I can't be here anymore. I need to get out. She hesitated, biting her lip. Then, to my surprise, she nodded. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. If you need to leave, let's get you out of here. What? I blinked at her, stunned. You believe me? Her smile was small, sad. I don't know what's going on, but I know you, Jason. And if you say you need to go, I'm not going to let you do it alone. Relief washed over me, mingled with a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Maybe. A car turned the corner, its headlights sweeping across us. I froze, my heart lurching. The car slowed, creeping toward us, its windows dark and tinted. I grabbed Katie's arm, dragging her back into the shadows. Jason, what? Shoo, I hissed. Someone's looking for me. We pressed ourselves against the brick wall of the alleyway, watching as the car rolled past. It was a black sedan, unmarked, no license plate. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't stop, wouldn't turn around. After what felt like an eternity, the car continued down the street, disappearing around the corner. "Who was that?" Katie whispered, her eyes wide. "I don't know," I muttered. "But we can't stay here." I glanced at my watch. 11:15. 45 minutes until midnight. "Do you have your car?" I asked urgently. "Yes. It's just around the corner." "Good," I said. "We need to leave. Now." She didn't argue. We darted through the alley, emerging on a side street where her old sedan was parked. I slid into the passenger seat, my hands trembling as she started the engine. We pulled away from the curb, the car rumbling softly as we drove through the quiet streets. "Where are we going?" she asked. I stared out the window, my mind racing. Where could we go? There had to be some way out. Some road that would lead us past the invisible boundary I'd always sensed. But even as I thought it, a chill ran down my spine, because deep down I knew no one ever left this town. Not really, but I had to try. I had to. "Just drive," I said softly. "Head for the highway, as far as we can go." And then, in the rearview mirror, I saw it. Pair of headlights, closing in fast. The car behind us sped up, its headlights glaring in the mirror. Katie's grip tightened on the wheel as she glanced nervously at me. "Jason, what do we do?" she whispered, panic edging into her voice. "Just keep driving," I said, forcing myself to sound calm. "We need to get to the highway." I turned to look out the back window, my heart hammering. The black sedan was gaining on us, its engine a low, menacing growl. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out, but there was nowhere to go. We were trapped in a small, sleepy town with only a few roads leading in and out, and the people chasing us knew them all. Katie took a sharp turn, the tires screeching as we sped down a side street. The sedan followed, relentless. I watched in horror as the distance between us shrank. We were running out of time, running out of options. "There!" I shouted suddenly, pointing to a narrow dirt road that cut through the woods. It was barely visible in the darkness, the entrance overgrown and unmarked. But I knew it led out of town. At least, that's what the old maps I'd found in the library suggested. "Are you crazy?" Katie gasped, but she didn't slow down. She veered onto the dirt road, the car bouncing violently over the uneven ground. The trees loomed around us, their branches clawing at the windows like skeletal fingers. For a moment, I thought we'd lost them. But then, with a roar, the sedan swung onto the road behind us, its headlights blinding in the rearview mirror. "Faster!" I urged, my voice tight. "Go faster!" Katie slammed her foot on the gas, the engine whining in protest. We tore down the dirt road, the tires skidding on loose gravel. The forest closed in around us, the darkness deep and oppressive. And still the sedan kept coming, relentless. "They're going to catch us," Katie cried, panic flaring in her voice. "No, they're not," I said, even as my heart pounded in my chest. "We just need to." A loud bang cut me off. The car lurched to the side, and Katie screamed. I turned, my blood running cold as I saw the back tire had blown out. The sedan was right behind us now, its headlights casting long, twisted shadows. "Keep going," I shouted. "Just keep going." But it was too late. With a groan, the car shuddered to a stop, the blown tire sending us skidding off the road and into a ditch. We crashed through a tangle of underbrush, coming to a jarring halt. My head snapped forward, pain exploding behind my eyes. "Katie," I gasped, struggling to sit up. "Are you okay?" She nodded weakly, dazed but alive. What do we do?" Before I could answer, the sedan pulled up beside us. The doors swung open, and two figures stepped out, silhouetted against the headlights. I froze, every muscle tensing as they approached. "Stay in the car," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Lock the doors." Katie stared at me, fear and confusion warring in her eyes. "Jason, who are they?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But they're not going to take us." I reached for the door handle, my heart pounding. I didn't have a plan, just a desperate, wild hope that I could distract them long enough for Katie to escape. But as I pushed the door open and stumbled out, I realized something that made my blood run cold. I knew them. Jason, one of the figures, called softly. A woman's voice, calm and familiar. She stepped into the light, and I felt my knees go weak. It was Sarah. She looked exactly the same as the last time I'd seen her. Same blonde hair, same soft smile. But there was something off about her eyes. Something empty. "Sarah?" I breathed, my voice trembling. What are you doing here?" "I'm here to help you," she said gently. "Just come with us. Okay? It'll be easier if you don't fight." I shook my head, backing away. No, you disappeared. You were gone." "How?" "It's okay, Jason," she murmured, taking a step closer. "I didn't disappear. I just went somewhere else. Somewhere better." Behind her, the second figure moved into the light. My heart clenched painfully. It was David. "Come with us, Jason," he said quietly. His voice was flat, emotionless. "There's no point in running." I stumbled back, horror clawing at my throat. "No, this isn't real. You're not real." But they just stood there, watching me with those same empty eyes. And then I realized what Mr. Halverson had meant. They weren't my friends anymore. They were them, whatever they were. "Get away from me," I shouted, my voice cracking. "Please, Jason," Sarah whispered. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I turned and ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Branches whipped at my face, roots snagged at my feet, but I didn't stop. Behind me, I heard them calling my name, their voices soft and sweet. "It'll be over soon," David murmured. "You'll understand, Jason. You'll see." I crashed through the underbrush, my vision blurring. I had to get away. I had to. My foot caught on something, and I went down hard. Pain shot through my ankle, and I cried out, clutching it desperately. But before I could move, before I could even think, a pair of hands closed around my shoulders. "Shoo," Sarah whispered, her face inches from mine. "It's okay. Just let go." I thrashed, trying to fight, but she was impossibly strong. Her grip tightened, pinning me to the ground. "We've been waiting for you," she murmured. "It's your turn now." "No," I whimpered. "Please, don't." But then David was there, kneeling beside me, his expression calm and distant. He reached out, his fingers brushing my forehead, and everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was back in town. The sun was rising, casting a soft, golden light over the quiet streets. I blinked, disoriented, my mind fuzzy. I was standing in front of my house, my hands shoved deep in my pockets. "Jason." I turned slowly. My mom was standing on the porch, her face creased with worry. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice tight. "We were so worried." I hesitated, my thoughts sluggish. What had happened? I remembered running, the woods, Sarah and David, and then nothing. Sorry, Mom, I mumbled, my voice flat. I just needed some air. Her expression softened slightly. Well, come inside, honey. Breakfast is almost ready. I nodded slowly, turning toward the house. My mind was still reeling, fragments of memory slipping through my fingers like sand. But as I stepped inside, a thought bubbled up from somewhere deep and dark. You didn't leave. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. You didn't escape. And then I knew. I had disappeared. I was just like them now. Because when I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize the eyes staring back at me. They were empty, just like David's, just like Sarah's. And deep down, I knew what would happen next. Someday, someone else would start asking questions. Someone else would end up on the list. And I'd be there waiting for them. Because once you're on the list, you're never really gone. You're just somewhere else, waiting for the next one.